Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Legally Speaking. I'm your host, Oves Anwar. 5 months ago, the United States and Israel struck Iran, killed its supreme leader, and set off a war that has since drawn in Lebanon, Iraq, the Red Sea, and most of the Gulf countries. Now, in April, Pakistan began brokering a ceasefire and hosted talks in Islamabad. In June, we had an agreement. An MOU was signed between Washington and Tehran. But within a month, by the middle of July, both were accusing the other of breaking it, and the strikes resumed. Now, are we back at square one with a conflict that is threatening the world economy once again? To help me understand and make sense of all of this, I am joined by Syed Muaz Shah. Muaz is a lawyer and legal academic with an interest in geopolitical affairs and international law. He's currently based out of Geneva, where he completed his LLM in international law at the Geneva Graduate Institute. He serves as a consultant to many UN agencies and international NGOs in the humanitarian sector. And he's a frequent commentator on the US-Iran war on international media. Muaz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Muaz, I wanted to begin, if you could just very briefly give, listeners who've lost track, because this has been going on since February, what actually broke down? The Pakistan brokered ceasefire. There was a lot of hope that this would bring an end to this, which would bring some level of normality to the situation, to the global economy, especially. How do you feel that it broke down? What were really the elements there? And now that we're back to heavy strikes between the two countries, what do you think was the trigger there?
Oh, well, this is a little bit more deeper than just the past few months. And I think there's always been a sense of mistrust from the beginning.
Hmm.
And I think, history is always a great place to start to understand the dynamics of relations between nations. And they play a big impact and role. And of course, the United States relationship with the state of Iran at the time, so under Reza Shah before 1979, was very different.
Yeah.
And then after 1979, of course, with the revolution and the advent of the Islamic Republic of Iran, things changed, particularly the dramatic embassy hostage crisis that captivated Americans and still captivates them. In fact, they made even a Hollywood film about it called Argo, and discusses those events with Ben Affleck as the actor. But it goes to show that 50 years on, that has been kind of the driving kind of factor of this confrontational relationship. And United States, obviously, the sanctions regime wasn't something just like yesterday or something that Trump came up, but it's something that's been around for a while. And so there's always been this adversarial approach. And of course, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, they essentially, one of the key elements of their, I guess you can say, ideological rhetoric has always been about imperialism and Western hegemony in the region, with Israel, the state of Israel, being the crux of it. So, with that, they wanted to push revolutionary agenda across the board, and hence why they supported a lot of proxies that ended up, obviously having some sort of influence in the regional affairs. A lot of times to kind of contain Israel, or at least in Israel's kind of argument is that to cause damage, and they obviously label that as terrorism. But for them, it's more for the different factions from Hezbollah to Hamas to the Houthis, who also, of course, are not just exclusively for containing Israel, but perhaps having some impact in the Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia. And that's something that the United States has also understood, and that's why they have leveraged the support of the Gulf nations and promised them defense assurances, which Iran has now, of course, in this recent conflict tested. And to the disappointment of some Gulf states, they feel like they haven't gotten the better end of the deal after
Hmm.
investing billions of dollars into America, the American economy, saving it from its collapse, essentially. According to some analysts, that the Gulf contribution has been very significant, particularly not just in the oil contracts, but also in the direct investments. I mean, I was reading somewhere where someone suggested that Saudi Arabia's investment is almost equivalent to the state of Florida when it comes to monetary terms. Like if they had to buy back whatever is owed to them, it's one of the most significant states in the United States. That's Miami, Orlando, those who know. Florida is one of those more important states. So it goes to show you the level of investment, just Saudi Arabia compared to other Gulf states. Of course, they have their own contributions as well. So this shows that the relationship always was a tense one for this past 50 years. And as a result, over the years, it's gotten more tense because of different factors. The more recent one, we need to understand with the backdrop of American domestic politics as well. Donald Trump, of course, came in with the position that he's always, countering Obama, and that has always been kind of a very noted kind of a domestic political rhetoric that he's always put forward. That whatever Obama has done, he's going to undo it, and that's where this kind of, you can say, recent Iranian conflict during the Donald Trump first administration was really triggered because of that Iranian deal, the nuclear deal that Obama had put together. That, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize is connected to that as well. And hence why Donald Trump keeps bringing that up as an important element in his own feather in the hat. So this goes to show these things are interconnected and why they're added. And every time, if you notice a lot of rhetoric from Donald Trump, he keeps on identifying, I did this that's different from Obama, and Obama gave them money, and Obama gave them concessions. And ironically, the MOU that was supposedly signed, it's almost like there's a lot of similarities there. Giving concessions, monetary, and of course, lifting up some sanctions and releasing some of that money that's been kind of held from the Islamic Republic of Iran for those oil contracts that were sold in banks. And so there's just a lot of same things, and that's something difficult for Trump to then have his domestic populace swallow, because here they've been hearing him saying all this stuff earlier about the critique of Obama, and then he's ending up basically in a similar deal, if not worse deal, that Obama had put together, and that's basically political suicide. But I think Trump is, of course, a very dynamic person. He's able to wiggle himself out in these really constricted scenarios where I feel like other domestic politicians may have failed. So I'll give him the credit for that he's savvy enough to be able to do that. And he's able to kind of, he's camera friendly, so he knows how to be in front of a camera. He has that capability. So that's where basically this backdrop is. So with this conflict with Iran and the United States going on for some time, it flared up again. And I think one of the flare-ups was a result of a previous conflict 6-8 months ago that were what they call the 12-day war, in which Donald Trump had done some strikes in Iran. Iran had responded with some missile firing and on some bases in the Gulf region and sent some missiles towards Israel. And then there was a hush-hush about it, and everybody was kind of happy. And there were some really surreal things that came in that. For example, Iran intimating the United States that we're sending missiles to this base. Who does that? I mean, and so everybody, who were the analysts, were sitting around like this is either a show or whatever it is. And Trump thought, to be honest, because of this previous experience with Iran, that a similar scenario would go down. But unfortunately, there was a lot of steps that Donald Trump had done that actually was building up the momentum for a more stronger response from the Islamic Republic. And one of those incidences, of course, is the attack and assassination on Qasem Soleimani. Now, most people have heard, of course, he's was the one of the main military commanders, and also kind of the proxies were taking guidance from him, and from Assad to Hezbollah to Yemen to the Hamas. But what a lot of people don't know, if they do their research carefully, Qasem Soleimani was in Iraq to meet with a certain delegation to bridge the barrier between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And
Wow.
to have him in that moment, the United States knew about this. It wasn't something that was hidden. They knew about this. And to have him being killed there, it raises the question. Does the United States strategically feel that they don't want Saudi Arabia and Iran to get together, or perhaps the Israelis were kind of involved in this and egged it on? I mean, there's a lot of factors there, but the fact that he was there to create better relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran and create diplomatic ties, when they had established, proper embassies once again and ambassadors. So there was this window of opportunity, I think, for Saudi Arabia and Iran to kind of come close together, but to the disadvantage perhaps of Israel. And that's something that he is a big underlying factor of why the conflict still continues and why it's expanding. creating, for example, what the Houthis are currently doing with Saudi Arabia. That what is the angle there? And then of course now we have these clips of Senator Lindsey Graham that are coming to the public that clearly indicate that the Americans or a certain part of the political establishment in America wanted the Arab nations to get involved at some point during this war. So I mean, there's a lot of things. I know we're going to break it down further, but in the context of this, it's a recent flare-up. But this time around, I think the Islamic Republic of Iran has felt that it's time for us to make a stance. They really were in a very weak place, domestically speaking, with the death of Raisani. And then, of course, you had some other kind of significant setbacks, the 12-day conflict. And it really looked, with Hezbollah kind of essentially maimed after the, pager attack that everybody's seen. So in Hamas and Gaza, what was going on. So there was this really kind of downside that maybe this is like the tipping scale. And perhaps I think maybe the United States and Israel's egging, we can tip the scales and, just like Lindsey Graham said, take out a few cities and then I think the regime will collapse. And they've seen those protests in Iran and they thought that perhaps perhaps maybe in January, but not in February when the attacks started happening. At the same time, to the credit of independent journalists, there was some kind of involvement of intelligence agencies in Iran, Mossad, I don't know, CIA, but Mossad for sure, to kind of egg on these protesters against the Iranian regime there. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors at play here. I just feel like, the recent flare-up is something that Iran is now responding back quite strongly and will continue to respond strongly because I feel like they feel now a revitalization of the revolutionary spirit, which they had essentially not felt since 1979. And so the dynamics are a little bit more different than they were in previous kind of confrontations with the United States.
Once it's really interesting that you say this because this flare-up does seem like it's different from previous flare-ups, right? We've now witnessed the Houthis saying that they're going to be fully involved, especially against Saudi Arabia. This brings Pakistan into it because of the relationship that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia has. The Saudis and the Americans have conducted attacks jointly against pro-Iranian militias in Iraq. So it does have a more regional flavor to it than say the previous several months as well. And in your opinion, do you think that this is going to get a lot worse, or do you think that this is something again that it's a flare up, it'll calm down eventually?
It's sad to say. I wouldn't say worse, but it's not going to get better. And perhaps there's more chances of it getting worse than getting better. What I mean by that is not completely worse, like people are assuming that it'll be some sort of World War III. I still don't think it's going to come to that level. And I think that those analysts, I think they're just pundits or just saying that just for clickbait or whatever you want to call it. In reality, I think it'll be a long sustained conflict simply because both sides have something that they haven't gotten. And they both feel strong enough about their position. So whereas on one side, the Islamic Republic of Iran feels the revolution is revitalized with this new Ayatollah Mustafa, who, of course, we have to understand the background context. Personal context is so important here. Absolutely. This man lost his entire family. He has been maimed. He has, I mean, even when the peace, we can say talks or ceasefire negotiations, the MOU, Islamabad MOU were going on, he regrettably agreed with President Pezeshkian and said that I will agree to these terms, but he must not forget the principles on which, the fact that that was mentioned in a very public address and which obviously hasn't come out openly yet, but through his official channels, he communicated that, which showed the kind of like regrettable agreement to let's go forward this and put the responsibility on President Pezeshkian and the National Security Cabinet to kind of ensure that the rights of the Iranian people are not trampled on. And I think that was something telling. So we have a very kind of hard-lined, I can say, position from the Iranian state. There are, of course, small players and factors. There's always been factions within the Iranian establishment. People tend to think, oh, they're all just one group of mullahs. No, they have the reformists, they have conservatives, they have the religious, and they constantly have domestic politics like anywhere else. And I think that's something a lot of people don't know who don't know Iranian politics.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to kind of take a look at that to understand that dynamic. So they're in the position like our revolution is revitalized. We feel the Strait of Hormuz is in our control, and this is the linchpin for the whole situation. And America can't do anything. And if they want to do something, it would have to be very drastic, which the United States is not willing to do, which is either boots on the ground or exhausting, a very limited supply that's left of their interceptors and missiles or whatever they have. And of course, you have the external players, which, China and Russia, with Russia already engaged in Ukraine and China's Xi Jinping coming out the beginning of this year. In fact, ironically, people don't make this connection, but Xi Jinping had come out and made a statement at the beginning of the year, of the new year, and then in which that the next day, Donald Trump has started the attack. So I was just like, there's got to be a connection to this where he made a statement about Taiwan, how in 2027, that's going to be everybody has known that that's been a goal, but the first time to verbally put it in an annual address was something that people were surprised, and then put a date on it, which is next year. So what does that mean? Like, and so I think China also realizes with America moving around its missiles and interceptors out from Ukraine, out from Taiwan and the South China Sea to buttress their depleted stock in the Gulf states, because they don't want to lose the Gulf allies either, who have felt, that there's been no benefit in this decades-old relationship. I mean, we're getting hit over the head. Our desalination plants are getting hit. Our oil pipelines getting hit. Refineries. What was the point of these billions of dollars and this cheap oil that we gave to the United States and their military, which can't do anything? We're the ones facing the brunt of it. And that's the rude reality. Actually, Iran also wants the Gulf countries to feel that this ally of yours was never really sincere. I mean, they're never going to put their heads out for you. I mean, they've used you.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's something that the rhetoric they have. But the United States, on the other side, you have to send domestically. Trump, ironically, and this always was the case, and my father used to joke about this when he used to say, when a politician says yes, he means maybe. When he says maybe, he means no. And when he says no, he's no longer a politician. So there's an old joke. But the truth of it, Donald Trump has always said to the American public, I want no war. And, when he says that, obviously, that's like, oh, yeah, okay, look at Donald Trump. He's the no war type of guy. And then that's really just a maybe. It's not really even no, it's maybe there will be war. And that's exactly what happened. And he used that opportunity with the Iran situation and with obviously their relationship with Israel, and Israel also egging on the situation to kind of expand and take away attention from Gaza. I think that's also the Israeli kind of agenda as well, is that once they kind of got Gaza in the situation that to the best of their extent they were able to do it, they wanted to shift the attention. And now no one talks about Gaza. I mean, there's hardly, there's like a second column that comes in. You see it, the Gaza news on the second or third page of the newspaper these days. And nothing is on the front page anymore. It's all Iran, it's Lebanon, and I think that was a strategic move by Israel from a propaganda perspective as well. And still what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank is now coming out a little bit. But this was one element for them. And just kind of, I'm going to end on this note for Donald Trump. I feel that he wanted to one up Obama, and he wanted to say that Obama's deal was a failure. So it was kind of a play to his personal domestic politics as well, and also showed through military strength the American might. And I think that's always been kind of a position, and particularly with a person like Donald Trump, who is all about creating these huge actions, and and even the
spectacles and whatnot.
Exactly. And so that's something that he plays on. He's a theatrics type of guy. So, I mean, we blew them, to the dark ages and stuff. But a lot of that stuff, and just kind of like with a small nuancing point I just want to mention here, like right when the attacks were happening in the beginning, the first 3 days, he made a tweet that said that the Iranian nation, I'm just paraphrasing it, but the Iranian nation, which stood strong for 3,500 years as undefeated, has now been defeated. And I was thinking that the people he's pandering to, or the so-called anti-mullah or the pro-Shah elements within Iran, they're very proud of their Persian heritage, and to have to just like kind of just roll over that as well. I mean, come on, you have a few allies there. Why are you going to just make them angry too? And a lot of them, and that's why the revolution of Iranian state, which was very weak before these attacks, politically through the domestic pressures, all of a sudden had this, like cat in the corner resistance. And so now people are proud to be Iranian. Those people who are anti-mullahs, even those people who attended the protests, they're openly saying, you know what, this time we're standing with Mustafa, Ayatollah Mustafa, and the Iranian people, and we will fight and resist because our oil is our oil. Our domestic politics is our own issue. Don't get involved. And the only time you will see, kind of pro-U.S. or pro-Israeli is some demonstrators in the West, in Canada or the United States, and even Donald Trump doesn't really entertain that faction that much. So there's a lot of stories there, but these are the elements at play. Which I think people don't talk about it a lot, but I think Donald Trump's personal kind of thing with Obama is a very important factor. He doesn't. He's a non-establishment person.
Yeah.
So and if everybody can go back in the timeline, it's only been hardly a year in his presidency. From the very beginning, he's been talking about Nobel Peace Prize. He's been talking about bringing more peace. And that's because, and then the first thing, Obamacare went, and anything that Obama touched, it became this thing that he just wanted to undo. And it just an obsession, I would say, for lack of a better word, that he's had. And people don't talk about it in the geopolitics of it. But if that people understand it in that context, and that's why I feel he's in a very tough situation, because he's going to have to give concessions to Iran if he wants a real deal. And we're going to talk a little bit, I think, about what could be a feasible deal that can happen. But that's going to put him exactly in the same place where he claimed he never wanted to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it certainly drives a lot of his psychology and helps you understand the individual. Moaz, I wanted to look at, the core dispute really now that it's become is the Strait of Hormuz, right? And maintaining control over it. Iran says that it wants to have sovereign control over it, all of those issues. Now, um, there's only so much that the U.S. can give. Can the U.S. offer sovereign control over the Strait of Hormuz? Is this something that, say, under international law is even permissible? What is your take on that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. It's a nuanced question as well. So in general, no, states can't stop the traffic, but and I say but, there's nuance right there. There are certain things which Iran can play. And to be fair to the Islamic Republic of Iran, I think they've played it very smartly since 1979. They have always raised the issue and reserved the issue of the Strait of Hormuz as something that they don't agree. That's what they haven't signed on to, for example, the International Law of the Sea, Covenant Convention. And so there's elements there that they've always been vocal about. So to be fair to the Islamic Republic of Iran, they have been very clear about their position from a very long period of time. It's not something like, oh, all of a sudden now Iran thought, oh, this is a great idea. Let's try to claim Strait of Hormuz. No, it's been there for a while. So I think that is that position that they've maintained for 50 years does have its value. And because neither the United States and Iran has signed, the convention, this leaves a kind of window for kind of this lacuna. But as the practice has been going on, in fact, I was listening to a clip from the United Nations where they also said, no, Iran can't do that. But I said, you didn't talk about the but. The but is that you're allowed to, regulate the passageways to ensure that shipping is safe and even take a fee for that. And of course, the example we have, and there's multiple examples. One, of course, is the Marmara Sea, in which the Turkish government in its vessels, they guide the vessels through the Marmara Sea from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and they take a small fee for it. And it's like transiting. It's not a toll per se. You can't call it a toll, but it is a service fee. And so what's interesting is Iran has been very careful about its rhetoric. It's always said from the very first day, oh, the Strait of Hormuz is open, but the transit passage is through us and with those who follow our regulations. Now, before it was open traffic, and Iran never imposed this kind of restriction on where the traffic should flow from. Of course, the scenario became created that this rumor or they actually did mine those areas. Obviously, I don't know the geographic actuality of it, but apparently the Omanian side of the Strait of Hormuz is mined. And so the only passage is through an island and then a small little kind of passageway between that island and the coastal region of Iran. And both are under Iranian control. And they said the vessels can pass through here.
Mm-hmm.
So it became kind of a point where it was like global shipping. All of a sudden, we're happy-go-lucky for the past 50 years. All of a sudden, it's like gridlock. And no one was prepared for it. It's kind of like how the United Nations wasn't prepared for Donald Trump all of a sudden defunding them overnight.
Yeah.
They had no plans, no backup plans, no alternative financial models, and it became a shock. I'm in Geneva, so that became a stark reality. I mean, people lost jobs overnight, and there was just like a huge downsizing. And now things have become a little bit more stable. But when you don't have a plan for a potential future that you didn't think this would be a threat, and no one thought the Strait of Hormuz could be a threat. And I believe even Donald Trump, unfortunately, I mean, we don't have the conclusive proof of it, but the way it seems is he also did not imagine, that the war would last more than 3 days. He thought that it'd be something similar to the 12-day affair that he had, because it's a habit of kind of like established norms. So he thought, well, I'll just go in, do a few attacks, and then all of a sudden Iran will come to the table. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. In the Strait of Hormuz lockdown, the global trade lockdown, and I think that's something that impacted it. So going back to your question, is it possible? No, you can't do it overall, but there's certain exceptions to the rule, which Iran has actually tried and attempted to kind of put out there. Like they've always said, oh no, the transit is free, they're friendly nations. And you also have to understand one element here that people don't really chime in on. You have to understand that the United States is at war with Iran, right? Mm-hmm. So now commercial vessels or flag states of, let's say, countries that are sympathetic with the United States or perhaps providing them military assistance through refueling or having their planes fly through their airspace that eventually bomb Iran, Iran could have a long stretched out argument saying that, well, you're part of the U.S. war effort against us. And so therefore, in our security interests, we need to kind of get on your ships to kind of see that. And Iran would be able to kind of justify that by a stretch, definitely for U.S. ships, but perhaps other ships as well that maybe U.S. allies, all those Gulf nations who, traveling to and coming from, Iran may be in a position to actually argue, what, the belligerent nation, the United States and its allies are attacking us, and we need, for our security, we got to ensure that this isn't something against us. Are these container ships transporting civilian goods, or are they not? And I think there are certain things that they can play on, and I think they have attempted to play on, at least publicly speaking. And it gives them that kind of position. Of course, the United States came back and said, which was ironic, and I'm still trying to understand the point of that. They just did a blockade, and Trump said, well, we're just going to blockade this. So it was like the Strait of Hormuz was blocked, or the United States was blockade, and the blockade is also illegal. So, and then the Chinese, of course, had an incident that could have flared up, and then, of course, it was managed, and it showed that the blockade was either just a public stunt or what it was. We don't actually know. But they attempted, of course, one Iranian vessel was actually taken out, and there was an incident. In fact, there were some sailors from other nations, including Pakistan, on that. So, I mean, it's a little bit complex, but overall, no, you can't blanket block a passageway because it should be free transit. But the exception to the rule is that the coastal countries can actually provide the passageways and take a small service fee to guide the ships through there. And if Iran is playing on those cards, then perhaps they may be able to justify that. And I think that is their long-term plan, as they've also expressed that a few times through some of their official communication. And to the recent flare-up, for example, they said that the Strait of Hormuz is open, but through the Iranian passageway, not through the Omanian waters, which Donald Trump, said the next day, Strait of Hormuz is open, just go on through, and it doesn't matter where you come from. And that's where the disagreement actually came from. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about this Article 5 of the MOU and what that means. And Iran had a certain interpretation of it, and the United States had an interpretation of it, and then the flare-up happened once again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we've seen for the past 2-3 weeks.
Absolutely. The MOU is exactly what I wanted to come to. This is a 14-point memorandum. If you compare it to anything previously, I was quite stunned at what was really offered to Iran in this. But again, it's an MOU, it's not a treaty. Does that, have a legal distinction? Does that make a difference? And secondly, some of the points are really open to interpretation, and both sides can really take, what they want from it. And so it gives enough face saving to either side. What do you make in specifically of the points that you raised on the Strait of Hormuz? So what are your views on that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I think typically when any lawyer would look at, oh, it's an MOU and MOU doesn't mean anything. That's true in typical civilian terms, but when it comes to interstate relationships, MOUs actually sometimes do have legal weight.
Yeah.
And it depends on the intent of the parties. And the intent of the parties is read through the verbiage. And so when you look at the verbiage of those 14 points, you said shall and should. And so there's commitments that are being made by both sides. So it has more value than just a piece of paper, that's for sure. And then, of course, there's a commitment for a more final agreement to be had, which goes to the kind of the second point of yours is that because it's vague, and the vagueness of it is actually what creates the weakness of it. The vagueness is what actually allows the misinterpretation and leads to conflict of the parties. And then, of course, typically international agreements, there's usually a body that's created to, cover over the disputes between the two parties. And there was really just only a executive monitoring mechanism that they had said would be put in place. That's the only mention of any neutral kind of authority that would be created from this. So it's weak in that sense. And then, of course, there's no dispute resolution kind of mechanism either. So, I mean, that's kind of the thing. Executive monitoring is not exactly dispute resolution. So there was a lot to be had. And but then again, it was very clearly put that this is just the first step towards a more comprehensive agreement. So there was an intent of the parties to actually go towards a more solid agreement. Now, for MOUs, you got to understand that, there's a lot of mistrust. I mean, like the mistrust, I don't know if we're going to talk about it later, but I'll just mention it now. The mistrust is massive. And it's massive because of the experience that's been had, particularly with the Iranians. I mean, you had Abbas Arachi the other day. He was given, I think, an interview. And he said, I was telling Steve Witkoff, you ever think like you go in a meeting and like at any moment you could die? Like, how could you even have like a conversation in a calm environment when you think like, a bomb may come and just kill me in that moment? And that's unfortunately the feeling, the environment that's been put out. And that's not a very good mediating environment at all, where the other party feels unsafe. I'm a certified mediator. The first thing you want to ensure parties that it's safe here, it's confidential and nothing is going to be kind of used against anybody outside. And you have no fear where, if I'm fearing that I'm sitting in this room and I might not be able to walk out of here alive, and that phone call I had with my family, Abbas Sarachi says, might be the last one I had with my family. I'm thinking about all those things while the negotiations are going on. That puts the whole kind of mood in a certain place. And unfortunately, the United States has created that. I was in Geneva when both the first two rounds happened. The talks were scheduled to go to Vienna. It was like Omanian mediator had come out and the foreign minister had said it's done. It just needs ink on paper and that's it. It was just like everybody thought, oh, finally the markets reacted to it. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump starts the attack. And I think that was something that really took the whole world aback. Honestly, we were sitting in Geneva and we're like, it was tense. And then it was like, oh, okay, this is now just, it's done. It's just, some technical things on the nuclear point, they'll handle in Vienna, maybe with the assistance of the IAEA or something, but whatever the case may have been. But unfortunately, it didn't go that way that next week. That never happened. That date never came. And the Iranians have said, this is not the first time. It's happened before. As the example I gave earlier on Qasem Soleimani.
Yep.
As another example, of course, the attack on Hamas, the political establishment in Doha, when they were reviewing an American agreement and the Israelis attacked them while they were actually convening to review. And everybody knew that. And so these are things that create mistrust and distrust. And I think the international community, if for anything, should speak out more about this than other points. Of course, there's war crimes, all this other stuff that's going on. But I think this about destroying the environment to make peace. You know,
Mm.
peace can only be had if you create the environment for it. But if the environment is not there, there's doubt, there's second guessing, then it'll never happen. And I honestly don't even know how the Islamic Republic of Pakistan was able to do what it did. And it really was miraculous. I mean, most people in the world thought there's no way
Yeah.
like Iran's going to come to the table because of what's happened, whatever. And Donald Trump, you know, warm, you know, the rhetoric that was coming out from his tweets, unfortunately, which made people feel like this he wants to just destroy Iran completely. And then all of a sudden they want to have talks. So and then Pakistan is, you know, flying between Tehran and DC, Tehran and DC, and then finally, you know, with the help of some Arab states, particularly notably Qatar and Oman and Saudi Arabia, and even Turkey to a certain extent, you know, they created that environment and somehow it happened. And maybe, and I said this earlier in an interview, it really had to do with personal relations. And I think the personal relationship, particularly of Field Marshal Asim Munir with President Donald Trump. Now, people can, you know, criticize both of them, how they want to criticize it, but their personal relationship, I think, is something that even Donald Trump openly says all the time. You know, he's my most favorite field marshal. Like, you know, and it was because of him I stopped bombing. I took his call and I thought, you know, why not? Let's give peace a chance, you know. And I think, you know, if anything, the Pakistanis have understood the psyche of Donald Trump better than any other nation. I'll give credit to the Islamic Brotherhood of Pakistan for that.
Well, that's
And I
very
think
true.
they've really well for themselves domestically and international trade and so forth, but also in this moment, which people thought nobody could talk to Trump, you know, and to have Pakistan actually do that, it put Pakistan in a limelight in ways it had never. I don't think anybody could have imagined. I think there
Yeah.
was a lot of excitement, a little bit too much excitement, to be honest. I don't want to get into the too much. Even from the prime minister's office was, you know, people were working a little bit too faster than allowing things to happen. But it showed the excitement to be part of this, to be part of a major piece in this global negotiations. A lot of people were impressed by it.
Mm.
And I think there could be a lot more to come from Pakistan. And it demonstrates what Pakistan can do, not just here, but globally speaking, if it, you know, is able to do that in the right
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. But basically, this is kind of the crux of what I feel this MOU,
Mm.
though it was MOU and people may assume it's just a piece of paper, it does have some value, particularly when it's between states and the intent is given. And there were some commitments, there were words used like shall and should. So it's commitments being made by both sides to do something. So it's a little bit more than just a piece of paper,
Yeah.
but it's not to that level of the agreement because, like I said, there's no dispute resolution body, and they just have a very broad, like you mentioned, very open worded, you know, concepts that, you know, can be very vague and anyone can interpret one way or the other. So
Yeah,
it does
absolutely.
have value in international world law, but not to the extent of an agreement.
Moz, that's I'm very grateful for that. I wanted to come to the role that Israel's been playing in this. Now, Israel isn't a party to the MOU. It's continued its operations and bombings in Lebanon. It continues, its genocide in Gaza. And Tehran calls this, a violation of the agreement because ceasefire in Lebanon was part and parcel, at least from their understanding of this. Um, do you feel that the current conflagration or the current flare-up is, Netanyahu's doing because it seemed that out of this entire thing, especially when the MOU came about, Netanyahu was the biggest loser, if you will. That his dream of, having, a complete destruction of the Iranian regime. Sorry, could you say that again?
Greater Israel, his dream of
Yeah.
greater Israel.
Greater Israel, exactly. That had failed miserably, and in
Yeah,
fact, Israel came out far worse than it had going in. Right,
yeah.
whether it was public opinion, whether it was their leadership signaling that we'd be very happy to have American boots on the ground, but not Israelis fighting in Iran, and all of those things, right? What do you think is really the position that Israel is in right now, and do you feel it's behind? Trump going in again, missiles uh, blazing and whatnot.
Yeah, so the parable I like to kind of explain Israel's, and I really just came up with this in my mind, is Bibi Netanyahu's focused on let's keep digging, guys. We're going to hit gold, or we're going to hit strike gold or strike oil. And this has been a focus down there, and it's constant digging, and that means constant attack, constant war. And if there's a pause, then the pause makes people look up like, man, what sort of hole did we dig ourselves into? And he doesn't want that pause to happen, because if it happens, then people realize that, and the whole kind of thematic area of us trying to find and strike gold goes away, and that drive goes away. And that's why a state of constant war is something that Israel keeps the whole situation lopsided. So you have to look at, of course, one of the key elements is that you have the negotiation between Iran and Saudi Arabia that breaks up the dynamic, which they don't want, which Israel was trying to come up with an alternative with the Abrahamic Accords and energy pipeline to Europe. And there was all that discussion going on, and that was not successful. And so, but they don't want an Iranian kind of Saudi kind of close relationship, which could threaten that. And I think that's going to be very problematic for Israel if that does happen. So they've always thrown a monkey's wrench in whenever they've gotten the opportunity. I mean, the example I just gave earlier about the attack on Doha on the Hamas representatives, while they were looking at a U.S. Kind of document for a potential ceasefire, goes to show that Israel has its own agenda and its own politics that run it. And it's surprising that people think that they might be the same, but no. Donald Trump, of course, has his own kind of agenda. Yes, it may sometimes align with Israel, but Israel sometimes has its own agenda, and sometimes it doesn't want the war to go on. There's that clip that's going viral about Lindsey Graham talking to Bibi Netanyahu. He's like, maybe I can convince Trump to join you in the attacks in Lebanon. And then Netanyahu's like, thanks, Lindsey, but I think perhaps, this won't be good, because if Hezbollah feels we're going to destroy them, they might lash out at us, and it may be more it may be damaging to us. So let's not put Hezbollah into a corner like that. And then Lindsey Graham says, oh yeah, okay, maybe perhaps next time. So it goes to show you, like, Israel's like trying to manage the conflict, but keep it escalated to a certain way where negotiations can't happen and still fractured. And that's how they want to run. And I think that's something that unfortunately UAE has also got caught up in this because of their, closer relationship with Israel versus other Gulf countries, where they have, in Sudan and Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, of course, reacted quite openly and straightforwardly in the Yemen situation because it's next door to them. And that's why it impacts. I mean, Saudi's been a quiet giant in the Gulf, and it's like if you tease the bear too much or get close to him, he's going to react. And I think that's what Saudi Arabia kind of has been playing this role. But and all these strategic kind of understandings go with how Trump is looking at the situation, and Bibi Netanyahu as well. But Netanyahu's always thought, thrown a monkey's wrench. When the Iran deal was going on, he understood that the Lebanese ceasefire was connected to the Iran deal. And that's how Iran had kind of thrown that loophole in, even though Israel was not part of the MOU. And of course, it couldn't be part of the MOU for many reasons. I mean, if the technical reason is Pakistan doesn't recognize the state of Israel, and they're the ones that are the mediators in the room, but also Iran doesn't. So, I mean, it's like, when you don't even recognize anyone, what sort of authority are you going to have signing on to that? And it didn't make sense for them to even be on the MOU because, to be honest, the United States is a close ally of Israel. It does have influence over Israel. We can, everybody can go see all the various videos about how much influence. So that's what I think in the Israel's position has always been to throw a monkey's wrench in the scenario. And that's why they ratcheted up the attacks in Lebanon right when the MOU was happening, hopefully trying to sabotage it. But was really interesting, and I think this is a small point that many people don't reflect on. The attacks in Lebanon didn't really have that dramatic of an effect that I think Israel thought it may have had, where Iran would have reacted more violently in response to it, and they didn't do that. So they stuck to it. What became the stickler point was the Strait of Hormuz and how the shipping lanes open, and that became kind of the element that flared up the conflict once again, where the United States understood Article 5 to mean Strait of Hormuz is open and all the ships can come through. And Iran was saying, no, you can't. You can come through, but you can come through the Iranian waterways where we have kind of ensured the safety of the ships. And I think the problem with that also is that Article 5 put it on the Iranian shoulders the responsibility to ensure the safe passage of ships. And perhaps Iran knows that that other side is quite mined. And if any mine goes off, they'll get blamed that, Iran, attacked a ship. And there's that scenario. I think they were also being very careful And that's why they asked for time. If you read the MOU very carefully, for first 30 days this, and then 60 days this, and then a regime would be put in place. So obviously there's that window that was going to develop into eventually more opener Strait of Hormuz. But until that happened, I think Iran was in a position to say that, because the wording in Article 5 also lays the responsibility of that on Iran. And I think United States, Donald Trump, I know he was excited, and obviously he signed a major deal, came out and openly said, "Oh, it's all open," and that became kind of a flare-up point where one ship attempted to kind of do that, but it was not something that Iran didn't take kindly to, and then there was a reaction, and then things went south from there. So Israel, of course, Netanyahu just met Donald Trump in Washington with the death of Lindsey Graham, and so there was this kind of thing. Oh, there must be something going on. No, he attended the funeral, but I think Netanyahu strategically visited Trump because Trump has been quite open about his criticism against Bibi Netanyahu, particularly in the context of his attacks on Lebanon. Because Lebanon, he wanted to broker the peace deal, which he did in Washington, and he wants to see that somehow survive. And in fact, there's intelligence reports to suggest that he wants Ashara and Syria to get more involved to help kind of Lebanon buttress itself. Because you have to understand, the only real, you can say, military force in Lebanon is Hezbollah. Yeah. And if you will defang Hezbollah, then it becomes, just Israel can walk over, and that's something that they prefer. Whereas I think Donald Trump wants to kind of empower the Sunni Arabs, you can say, and especially Ashara, which of course Saudi Arabia is kind of doing that, and that's actually kind of a favor to Saudi Arabia in these interlinked points that I want to mention, and that's why they're trying to play that up. That's why the U.S. and Saudi combined strikes in Iraq are also interesting, because they probably want to bring this into kind of a broader Saudi kind of Sunni fold, kind of countering Iran, which has always been the plan. But he's trying to do it in a different way that perhaps maybe at the cost of what Israel's not willing to give. So we'll see how that turns out. But I definitely know that Netanyahu played on the sympathy of Lindsey Graham's death, for sure, when he was in Washington and he had that conversation in the Oval Office. And he probably did get something out of it. What he got, we don't know, but we're going to find out in the next few weeks. But Donald Trump is in a tough situation, and it's just a rock and a hard place. He's going to have to pretty much go back on a somewhat Obama-like plan and give Iran something, because Iran's chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz situation is something that they can't. And now with the Bab and Mandab situation, I need to add this point with the Houthis, it's added additional pressure on global shipping, which of course is teetering. And already with the pressure that's there, and I think that is kind of a coordinated effect. But at the same time, it's also kind of playing into the hands of what Israel and the United States want, the members there, which is to get the Saudis involved more. But I think the impact on the economic factor is what's key here. If the global shipping trade is threatened there, then it's it. Insurance policies go up, as analysts have clearly kind of connected the dots here. It's going to have a detrimental effect globally.
Absolutely. Moaz, my final question, we could discuss this for days, but my final question is really on the role that Islamabad or Pakistan, Pakistan brokered the original ceasefire. It hosted the talks. It was able to play a major role, far bigger than its perhaps international standing. What really have we gained from this? Has the current failure or apparent failure, is this something that looks bad on us? Is it something that undermines our position internationally? What is your take on that?
I live in Geneva, so I've been here for at least a year, and let me just say this, that I wish Pakistan can also take lessons from Switzerland. We don't have to showcase everything. I know it's exciting, it's to be in the global stage, to be at the center point, but I felt that with all due respect, not saying that every players, but a lot of the surrounding players, like the supporting team, the media, other people, there's a lack of maturity. I mean, people were talking about conflict resolution and like this great peace deal and two-track diplomacy, and you and me know, like, there's hardly you can count the people in the hand who know really how to do that, have been doing that for years, and they don't even talk about it. They do it, and that's how it is. And all of a sudden, there's like these a million plus people, experts are talking about this. I'm like, you guys have no idea. This is the last thing anybody talks about when you're doing mediating at this type of level. You don't have those flashy cameras and stuff. And I think that was something that also Iran was a little concerned about when the talks did happen. There was that photo opportunity they didn't want to be a part of, and I think that was important because there was of course the sentiment for the loss of life for the Iranian civilians. I think they were sensitive to that, and also it's too premature. And I think that is something that was a sign. And Pakistan, of course, it's great. It's a great learning experience, opportunity to be at the world stage, to learn from it, to mature from it. And I really like how the Pakistanis are coordinating with the Qataris, who have a little bit more experience in this, because they've actually kind of made it a part of their national kind of constitutional approach when it deals with foreign policy, is that mediate. In fact, they're the only country in the world that has mediation as a foreign policy tool, like in their constitution. And I think that's a unique point. Even Switzerland doesn't have that. Switzerland has mediation as a tool amongst its own cantons, but not as a foreign policy tool.
I see.
But so I think there's something that Pakistan can take from that and learn from that, from these, more kind of nations who've had that experience. And I'd like to see Pakistan more engaged, for example, in affairs in Central Asia. We have flare-ups that happen sometime between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. I think Pakistan can play a great role in being an anchor for that. So this is an opportunity to grow from that. But one thing we have to also be careful about, that you have to create the environment and the structure and train the people accordingly. A lot of what went on was they're very top heavy, and we can't deny that. I mean, the relationship between Field Marshal Asim Munir and even Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif with President Donald Trump was a very key factor. Iran's essentially cordial relationships, as you know, whenever the Iranian delegations come to Pakistan, there's a huge respect, and Iran always feels Pakistan is a close, brotherly nation. And of course, there's roots to this relationship too. For example, the spiritual forefather, for lack of a better word, of both nations is Allama Iqbal. And most people don't know that Allama Iqbal is highly influential in the Iranian state's creation. And in Pakistan, he's known, very much by everybody. His poetry was very important, of course, as a contemporary scholar, an Islamic scholar, and also, of course, in politics. And so I think there's a relationship there that also has that. And so that was played. And I think Pakistan can, like I said, take lessons from this and go on a more broader role in the region and play that role. And I think they're doing that, particularly, I mean, with this World Bank reassigning Pakistan under the MENAP. Perhaps Pakistan can play a broader role. And, we see a lot of leaders visiting Pakistan after this MOU and even during the MOU, for example, from Libya, from Azerbaijan and other places where potential conflicts have always been flared up, either internally or otherwise. But Pakistan has to play that mature role, and it has to create and train the people accordingly to be able to do that. I mean, it's very easy to find a good, trained, proper mediator in Switzerland. Like you have people who are trained, who have experience there. Also, you have that pedigree developing in Qatar, for example, and Oman and Kuwait to a certain extent too. But Pakistan, I feel, is a little new to this. And I think it's going to take time to build, but we can build on that momentum through this experience and get the right people in. And I think we have some people who are here, who are capable, especially in the diaspora, that can really build up that. So politically speaking, it was a very good win for Pakistan. It came out. But one thing I want to talk about the other side before I end this is that it comes with its risks. And I think those risks people don't really focus on, particularly Pakistanis, is that you talk a good game. And then when you can't deliver the game, there's like, well, did you know how to play it? And I think that's something that Pakistan, unfortunately, might get caught up in. The MOU was an exciting moment. There was a few days, and then it flared up again. And whose fault is that? Is that because Pakistan as a mediator wasn't able to create, the right deal, was too quick to push for a deal? And I think for the deal to happen, to be honest, it's a step-by-step approach. It's a give and take. And it's going to start real small. It's going to start like, here, Iran, we released some billions of dollars that we held in XYZ bank. Then Iran's going to allow 100 ships to go through, and then and there has to be that type of exchange. And there were moments for that. If you remember those 10 Pakistani ships that crossed, and Donald Trump made example of that. Oh, they allowed 10 Pakistani flag vessels through.
Yeah.
Iran, of course, was saying we always allowed, friendly nations to come through. We never stopped that. Only belligerent nations is what we're stopping. Like I said, for legal purposes, I think they worded it that way. It's
Mhm.
it shows that you have to give and take, and that I think is what's going to create a sustainable peace deal. And to be honest, it's not going to be a big deal. It's not going to be a deal on nuclear. It's not going to be a big regional deal. What I think is going to happen, being optimistic about this, is going to be a maritime deal on the Strait of Hormuz. And I think if we can get that, that would be the first small step. And I think we have to kind of take the Iranians out of the Lebanese situation, definitely make some vague commitments. I mean, that's a very difficult one. And I think Iran knew that, but they kept it in there as like kind of an out for them because they knew that Israel would create that. And we see what the flare ups have done now. It's created that scenario where, it's unfortunate what we're seeing. But I still feel there's hope, but it has to be a gradual, sustained progress with a little bit more of experience and maturity now that we've done that. So I think Pakistan can still play that role. I think Pakistan is probably the most important player, and that's why Qatar is kind of just in there to support the initiative. And I think with their continued support, we can probably make a breakthrough once again. But it has to be in small, minute amounts that builds up to that eventual maritime agreement deal.
Absolutely. Moz, thank you so much for taking out the time. Uh,
No,
ladies
glad
and
to be here.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for today. If you're watching this on television, this is a shortened version of our discussion. For the full version, please go to YouTube, Dawn News English's YouTube channel. Thank you very much.